Welcome to Lowriders. I'm Zach Quinones, and today we're going to be talking about which genre is best for you. So, this is sort of a thing that can be easy and hard at the same time. It just kind of depends. But one thing, especially if you're starting out as a writer, is what is a genre that you are best at? Not so much what you want to write the most, but what you're best at. And I know it can get a little bit dicey because, like, one thing we always talk about is like write the things that you want to write about. So if you want to be a science fiction screenwriter and that's the thing that entices you the most, that's the thing you want to pursue the most. But there is like an interesting thing to this is that sometimes the thing that you want to write about the most or specifically the genre is maybe not suited for you. So I'll use myself as an example. I am a big fan of sci-fi just in general, and I wanted to always be a science fiction writer of some extent, whether it's novels or screenwriting. And I've done a fair share of writing science fiction stories. I've done a few science fiction screenplays, but despite how much I really love that genre and how much I want to be a sci-fi writer, I realize I'm not that good at it, at least not yet. And so, one of the things that you're going to have to kind of be hard on yourself about is what genre are you actually excelling at? So, when you are a new writer, um, you have the luxury of really trying things out because you're new. You know, that first year or two, you could try comedy, you can try crime, you can try science fiction, fantasy, all of that. And you may enjoy one really well, you may prefer one over the other, but through that, you're going to figure out what you're actually good at. I've always been told I'm really good at crime, the crime genre, and drama genre to an extent, and which is good for me because I do like crime genre a lot. I like it more than science fiction actually. So that kind of worked out for me. But I do know screenwriters that have come to a place where it's like you have really good comedic timing, you'd be a really good comedy writer, and they're just like, I don't want to write comedy. Like that's not a genre that I really enjoy. And you have that right. But I do think looking at things from an optimistic standpoint, if you find yourself really good at executing a certain genre, definitely take advantage of that from a creative and a developmental aspect. Because I think when you can find a genre that you're really good at, it allows you to really enhance your skills over especially the longer period of time. And you can utilize that as a way to not only develop your skills as a whole, but you can gradually move those skills and those techniques to service the genre that you do want. I don't know why his name escapes my memory, but the director of The Big Short, you know, he comes from a comedy background, and while he still utilizes comedy into his scripts, you can tell that drama was the main thing that he really wanted to do. Um, or that's an assumption, but the fact that he is focused on sort of dramatic satire type films, it does pull away a lot from sort of the dick joke comedy that he kind of comes from. So as far as figuring out genres, I think one thing for myself that I noticed is that I was able to capture tone really well with crime and drama pieces. That is a subject matter I'm very well versed in. Um, Primarily because of where I grew up. Some of my friends that were involved on a very low level with criminal activity. So they're not anymore, obviously. But I was very well versed in sort of that world. And I also have like connections both on the legal side and people on the illegal side of things that as I was growing up through my middle school and teenage years and also early 20s, I just became very knowledgeable in that. So when I wrote crime and in like adjacent to that drama, I just knew sort of the feel and the texture of it very well from the get go. And so, if you're somebody that maybe wants to do crime, but you're like a big science buff, you might find yourself being very, very good at capturing the tone and the pacing and the texture of science fiction. And you might realize like, wow, I'm much better at science fiction, but I want to write crime, like pure crime, true crime stuff. So how do you juggle that? Obviously, you can get lucky and you can become really good early on at the genre that you want to write. But if you do find yourself in that dilemma, as I said, use it as an advantage to you, not only to develop your skills but also to build a name for yourself. Because if you are able to write really well in a certain genre and you find yourself in that space, you can build up a good reputation. You can utilize that to build up a network, to build up connections, to build a buzz around you. And then from there, you can kind of use that almost, this may not be the right metaphor, but like as a Trojan horse to get to the genre that you want. Uh, I think kind of a good example of this too is Todd Phillips. He did The Hangover, which was like one of his, if not his biggest comedy hits. And then he did The Joker. And so it's just like a big drastic shift. And that's another example of somebody utilizing a genre that they're really good at to get themselves to doing something that they most likely wanted to excel at. Now, obviously, he's a director, so it's a little bit different, but the sentiment stands the same. Now, as far as figuring out like what genre that you really good at, because it's one thing to say like, oh, I think I write science fiction better or crime better or fantasy better. The I mean, the easiest thing and the main thing is just to, as you're kind of exploring these different genres, is to just get them out to people to read and see which ones that people not only like the most or seem to get the most positive reaction out of, but also really like discuss it with them and ask them like, what about this did you like, what about this didn't you like? Or especially if you write like a fantasy script and several people really like it, what did you like about it? And some of those people may give you some really interesting insights into your own writing that maybe you didn't notice, and you can understand why that particular style or technique or writing skill that you have is beneficial to fantasy writing as it is to crime. So to kind of give more of a tangible example of that, like, and this is just a very simple example, so don't overanalyze it so much. I know that's probably not the best thing to say, but like with one writer that I did a couple workshops with, they they were doing something similar where it was like they were writing science fiction, but they were really good at comedy, and they just didn't really understand why the things that they were trying in science fiction weren't working, but the things they were trying in comedy were working. And part of it was is that when they wrote certain dialogue in science fiction, it came off bland. Um, but when he took pretty much like that same dialogue and put it in a comedy environment, it came off funny because it was like characters being serious about something, like they were serious in what they were saying, but because it was in a comedy environment, it made it sound funny. And so that's like a really good example of how certain skill sets that you have may work for one genre but doesn't for another. And it's having to understand like, oh, like the way that I write dialogue just doesn't work for dramas or sci-fi or crime. But when you put it in that comedy context, it works really well. That's why I'm really good at this. So let me start writing comedy and kind of learn the nuances of that a little bit better and get a better understanding of my skills with that, so that eventually I can develop that to where I can transition into science fiction or whatever else you want to write and be better at it. Same thing with like somebody who's really good at like prose and action. That may not work for a comedy script, but for a science fiction or an action, that may work amazingly. So it's just kind of seeing like how, that's why I always, when I say talk about like feedback and coverage, like when people say like, oh, this is bad or it's not good, it may not just be good just for that story or that genre. Maybe when you put it in a different setting, it works really well. And so you kind of want to take that approach, especially early on in your writing when you're trying to figure out like what's the genre that I can work at really well. Now, obviously, you can completely ignore this and just say, you know what, I'm going to do science fiction and I don't care if it takes me 5 years later to break in. That's what I'm going to do. I don't care if somebody says I'm better as a comedy writer. Fuck that. I'm going to do science fiction. Go ahead and do that. If you're going to take that approach, you most likely, it's one of two things. You either have to be so unique in developing your voice that regardless of the feedback you get, your approach and your style and your voice is going to just like pierce through that, and it's going to find a way, it's going to find its place. Or you have to be very malleable. So it's like when you're doing science fiction, I use science fiction as just the staple genre, whatever, but this applies to all types of genres. But if you're doing like science fiction and you're not really that great at it, and you maybe don't have a voice yet or you haven't really figured it out, you have to be very malleable. You have to be very willing to adjust and go through trial and error. Does this work? No. Does this work? Yes. Okay, I'll keep that. Does this one work? Yes. Okay, I'll keep that. Does this approach work? No, that doesn't work. So I'll change that. So those are really the two ways that I would say you can go about it. Whatever genre you do choose, the most important thing is to really understand the genre, the staples of the genre, and I don't want to say rules, but have the staples of the genre, what makes the genre so important and great, and have respect for those, but also do figure out a way to like do it your own way, which I know is kind of like a paradox situation because it's like trying to be like what they call it, genre bending or subverting the genre. Like you can do all that too, um, but just if you want to be successful at it, just understand that whatever genre you do pick, understand the staples of what makes it so good and entertaining, and then try to do your own thing with that. Now, as far, let's say you don't want to find any, let's say you want to do all genres, okay? That's doable. There's plenty, I don't want to say plenty, but there's a good amount of writers that can kind of bounce from genre to genre. The main thing is it's that understand where your limitations are. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know any screenwriter that is just like a master at every genre. I'm pretty sure there's one or two out there that if we did like kind of like a little bit of a dive online, we could find them. But just off the top of my head, I can't really think of anybody who like does a western and they do it like absolutely masterfully, and they do a crime and it's absolutely masterfully. They do a science fiction absolutely masterfully, and they just knock it out the park on all levels. You could think of like the Coen brothers as kind of a close thing to that, but their stuff mostly, it's mostly Coen brothers. They're kind of a genre in and of themselves, and there's the format they use, whether it's a western, crime, or whatever, fits into their personality and format. So they're kind of not really a fair one to use. But if you want to use all genres, I think one of the best things, because I went through that process of writing just a bunch of different genres. I think the best approach for that is focusing on one genre, like one and a half. And I say one and a half, so it'd be like if you're gonna write four scripts, three of them in the same genre, one of them in a different genre, and then maybe work on another two or three scripts, and again like two of those in the same genre, one in a different genre. So you don't want to just constantly rotating between genres. Like you want to kind of focus on one for a little bit and then kind of get started on another one. Then once you kind of get as far as you can go at the current moment with one genre, then the one that you started on the side, you can move fully into that one and then start another one a little bit here on the side as well. That's the best way I think to approach it. Don't try to like, oh, I'm gonna write a sci-fi, I'm gonna write a western, and I'm gonna write this. You can do that if you want, but I think it's gonna be really hard because it's just each one has so many different demands. It's really hard to just kind of give them the right attention that they need. So other than that, I'm gonna have a new workshop up pretty soon. It's called Dialogue, where we really dive into what makes good dialogue. I've been working on the sort of script for it, and it's a lot of stuff. It's gonna be probably a very like messy workshop in terms of we're going to be bouncing around from different things all over the place, but it's going to be really good because dialogue is something that I've always gotten a lot of props for. So I'm really excited to do that workshop, and it's going to be out in like a week. So the 5, 7, 20 of you that watch these videos, look forward to that.